The Zex'thra Combat Academy stood like a gleaming monument to galactic superiority, its crystalline spires piercing the purple-hued clouds of Nexus Prime. Holographic banners proudly displayed the graduation statistics of the most elite warriors in the Galactic Federation, though mysteriously, they always seemed to glitch whenever anyone asked about actual combat victories. Another glorious day of enlightening the primitives, thought Grand Instructor Morthak as he floated down the gravity-controlled hallway, his ceremonial combat arrays glinting in the artificial light. The 4 armed warriors' morning had been perfectly normal until Administrator Zix dropped the equivalent of a quantum bomb during the faculty meeting. "We're getting a human student," Zix had announced, causing Morthak to spill his premium-grade nutrient solution all over his datapad. A what he'd sputtered, all 3 of his eyes blinking in rapid succession. A human, Zix repeated, their crystalline form shifting colors in what Morthak recognized as barely contained amusement. "The Federation Council insists we need to show our commitment to diversity." Now, watching the aforementioned human standing in the orientation chamber, Morthak couldn't decide whether to laugh or submit his resignation. The creature was pathetically small, barely 7 feet tall, with only 2 arms, and Federation preserved them not a single natural weapon in sight. No claws, no energy channeling appendages, not even basic biosynthetic upgrades. Private Kai Rodriguez stood at perfect attention, somehow managing to look both respectful and utterly unimpressed by the tech surrounding him. The orientation chamber itself was a marvel of modern engineering, with quantum-locked gravity plates, psychic enhancement fields, and enough sensors to track a photon's life story. Yet this human seemed more interested in the old-fashioned physical training equipment in the corner. "Welcome, primitive, Private Rodriguez Morthak corrected himself smoothly, floating a few inches higher to properly look down on the human. "I trust you understand that the Zex'thra Academy maintains the highest standards in the galaxy." "Yes, Sir," Kai replied, his lips twitching slightly. "I read the brochure. Particularly enjoyed the part about your zero-gravity combat techniques, though I noticed you didn't mention anything about fighting in actual gravity." A ripple of something between amusement and outrage passed through the gathered alien instructors. Morthak, the combat meditation specialist, actually had to excuse herself to avoid displaying an unprofessional emotional response. "Our training incorporates all possible combat scenarios," Morthak stated firmly, gesturing to the high-tech training pods lining the walls. Each pod contained enough processing power to simulate entire war scenarios, complete with quantum probability calculations and temporal variance adjustments. "Though I doubt your species' primitive neural architecture could handle our more advanced programs." Kai's eyes wandered to where a group of senior students were practicing with plasma-edged weapons, their movements controlled by AI-enhanced neural interfaces. "Fascinating," he said, in a tone that suggested exactly the opposite. "I look forward to learning from your expertise, especially about handling multiple opponents without relying on technology." "Multiple opponents," scoffed Telvor, a serpentine advanced combat instructor. "Your species barely mastered basic tool use a few centuries ago. Perhaps we should start you with simple coordination exercises." The human's response was to execute a perfect backflip, landing soundlessly despite the room's enhanced gravity. "Of course, instructor, whatever you think best." Morthak felt a headache building in all 3 of his brain lobes. The human's file had mentioned something about martial arts training, but surely that was just a primitive attempt at organizing basic survival movements. Nothing like the carefully calculated, scientifically optimized combat forms taught at the academy. As the orientation proceeded, with demonstrations of their quantum phase training dummies and psychic combat simulators, Morthak couldn't shake the feeling that the human was mentally cataloging every piece of equipment, not with awe, but with the look of someone deciding which toys to play with first. And finally, Morthak concluded, "Your training schedule will be uploaded directly to your neural." "Oh, right. We'll have to provide you with a physical datapad." He managed to make it sound like accommodating Stone Age technology. Actually, Kai smiled, pulling out a battered paper notebook and pen. "I prefer to take notes the old-fashioned way. Helps with muscle memory." Somewhere in the background, another instructor quietly short-circuited their emotional suppression implant. The Academy's central training arena hummed with anticipation, its adaptive terrain system cycling through various combat environments while Morthak adjusted the gravitational settings. A crowd had gathered apparently, Watching a human fail spectacularly was worth missing lunch for. A simple demonstration, Morthak announced, his voice echoing off the quantum-stabilized walls. Since Private Rodriguez claims familiarity with, what did you call it? Hand-to-hand combat. Kai stood in the center of the arena, barefoot despite being offered the latest in combat footwear technology. Just basic training, sir. Nothing compared to your advanced techniques. The gathered aliens didn't quite grasp the concept of sarcasm, but something in Kai's tone made several of them shift uncomfortably. 50 credit says he breaks something, whispered a silicon-based cadet to their neighbor. His own bones, probably. 100 says he doesn't last 5 minutes, came the response. From the back of the crowd emerged VR Kath, his deuterium-based form rippling with barely contained energy. Standing nearly 9 feet tall, with a body composed of semi-solid metallic hydrogen, he was the Academy's top recruit. The sight of him usually sent other students scrambling for excuses to be elsewhere. I'll take those bets, VR Kath rumbled, his voice carrying harmonics that made the arena's force fields vibrate, and add another 100 saying the human surprises us all. Kai took a moment to center himself, memories of his training flowing through his mind. 15 years of Krav Maga, starting in the back alleys of Neo-Tokyo. 7 years of Silat under Master Chen in the underwater dojos of Singapore. That crazy year in Brazil learning the art of capoeira, followed by intensive training in Russian Systema. Each discipline a piece of the puzzle, each master adding to his understanding of how the human body could move, adapt, and overcome. The rules are simple, Morthak declared, interrupting Kai's reminiscence. You will face 3 training drones, each programmed with a different combat style. Survive for 5 minutes, and we'll consider letting you stay. The drones are set to non-lethal mode, mostly. The instructor gestured to a weapons rack filled with everything from plasma cutters to quantum disruptors. Choose your equipment. Kai stretched his shoulders, a motion that seemed to perplex the aliens with its simplicity. I'm good, thanks. You misunderstand, Morthak said slowly, as if speaking to a particularly dense child. These are training weapons. You require them to. With respect, Sir Kai interrupted, dropping into a relaxed stance that nevertheless made several combat instructors tense up. I'd prefer to demonstrate human capabilities without technological assistance. Seems only fair, given the circumstances. VR Kath's metallic laugh resonated through the arena. The human has spirit. Perhaps there's more to these primitives than cellular respiration and basic tool use. Your funeral, Morthak sighed, activating the drone release sequence. Beginning combat simulation in 3, 2. Kai closed his eyes briefly, feeling the familiar pre-fight calm settle over him. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind: the most dangerous weapon isn't the one they can see, it's the one they don't believe exists. The drones burst from their containment fields, their adaptive combat matrices already calculating optimal attack patterns. They clearly expected a primitive human to either freeze in panic or attempt to run. They really should have done more research on human martial arts. The first drone attacked with textbook precision, its plasma field humming as it executed a perfect quantum-calculated strike. According to its combat matrices, the human had exactly 0 escape routes. The human disagreed. Kai dropped and rolled, not away from the drone as its probability calculations predicted, but toward it and directly under its attack arc. Before the drone's adaptive algorithms could recalculate, Kai had already exploded upward, one hand grabbing the drone's primary sensor array while his legs wrapped around its stabilization unit. Is he hugging it? Someone whispered in confusion. The drone found itself suddenly acting as an unwilling gymnastics apparatus as Kai used its own momentum to swing himself around, redirecting its flight path straight into the second drone. Both machines collided with a satisfying crunch of premium alloys. Impossible, Morthak muttered, his third eye twitching. The gravitational stabilizers alone should have. The third drone unleashed a barrage of stun pulses, its targeting systems locked onto Kai's heat signature. This time, the human's response drew actual gasps from the crowd. He ran straight up the arena wall, pushed off into a backflip that shouldn't have been possible under the enhanced gravity, and landed on the drone's back like he'd been doing it his whole life. The wall, an instructor whispered. He used the wall, without grav assists or neural enhancement. Kai's movements flowed like water, each technique bleeding seamlessly into the next. A capoeira handstand transformed into a silent elbow strike. A systema roll became a Krav Maga takedown. The drone's combat matrices frantically tried to identify a pattern, but there was nothing to analyze. Every movement was simultaneously precise and unpredictable. The first two drones recovered, their self-repair systems bringing them back online. They flanked Kai, who now stood calmly in the center of the arena. Their processors calculated a 99.9% chance of success with a synchronized attack. The human smiled. What followed was a demonstration that had several alien species questioning their understanding of physics. Kai moved between the drones like a dancer, using their own attacks against each other. When one drone lunged, he redirected its momentum into the second. When they tried to trap him, he flowed through gaps that shouldn't have existed. Note the efficiency of movement, VR Kath commented, his metallic form vibrating with excitement. No wasted energy. No reliance on external power sources. Pure biomechanical perfection. A particularly spectacular sequence saw Kai grab one drone's arm, use it as leverage to vault over another, then somehow convince all three machines to tangle themselves into what looked like a very expensive knot. Time, Morthak called out, his voice slightly higher than usual. 5 minutes completed. Kai casually brushed off his hands and bowed to the drones, which were still trying to untangle themselves. Thank you for the practice. Your attack patterns are very educational. The arena erupted in a chaos of voices and rapidly exchanged credits. Several instructors were frantically reviewing the combat footage, trying to understand how their premium-grade training drones had been defeated by what they'd dismissed as primitive techniques. But the weapons protested Telvor, gesturing at the untouched rack of advanced combat gear. You didn't use any of the weapons. Oh, those Kai glanced at the gleaming array of technology. They're very impressive. But you know what's really useful in a fight? Having all your weapons literally attached to your body. Arms, legs, elbows, knees, nature's own armory, pre-installed and ready to go. An academic-looking alien in the crowd was practically vibrating with excitement. The adaptability. The improvisation. Did you see how he integrated the environment into his combat strategy? We must study this. Just basic training, Kai repeated his earlier statement, though this time no one missed the gleam in his eyes. Happy to demonstrate more if you're interested. Morthak looked like he was suffering from a severe case of cognitive dissonance. The drones were set to beginner level, he muttered, though everyone could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Were they? VR Kath's metallic form shifted in what might have been a smirk. I could have sworn I saw someone adjust them to advanced settings before we began. How mysterious. The crowd's attention shifted between Kai, the still tangled drones, and the growing pile of credits in VR Kath's hands. Several students were already attempting to mimic Kai's movements, resulting in a series of awkward falls and confused expressions. Perhaps. Morthak said carefully, all three eyes fixed on Kai. We should reconsider our definition of primitive techniques. Word of the drone incident spread through the academy faster than a quantum entanglement breach. By afternoon, the medical wing had treated 16 students for injuries sustained while attempting to run up walls like the human. The physics department demanded footage for analysis, convinced that Kai must have violated at least 3 fundamental laws of motion. VR Kath found Kai in the meditation garden, sitting cross-legged near a floating crystal formation. The deuterium-based warrior's approach sent ripples through the garden's quantum-harmonized atmosphere. Your demonstration was illuminating. VR Kath's metallic form shifted into what approximated a respectful bow. I request the honor of personal combat. 3 nearby students dropped their datapads. A passing instructor nearly crashed into a gravity-suspended planter. Honored by the challenge, Kai responded, unfolding from his position with fluid grace. Though I believe several regulations might have something to say about it. As if summoned by bureaucratic magic, Administrator Zix materialized between them, their crystalline form flashing warning colors. Absolutely not. The insurance implications alone would. With respect, Administrator VR Kath interrupted. The human has proven himself worthy of. Worthy of what? A trip to the molecular reassembly chamber. Zix's form sparked with agitation. Do you have any idea how many forms I'd have to fill out if you accidentally liquefied his carbon-based structure? Kai raised an eyebrow. You know, we humans aren't quite that fragile. This sparked an immediate debate among the growing crowd of onlookers. A medical student frantically pulled up human anatomical data on their holopad. "But your endoskeleton is made of calcium deposits," they protested. "And your hydraulic systems are based on iron oxide suspension." "You mean bones and blood," Kai suggested helpfully. "And look at this," another student pointed at the display. "Their neural network runs on electrical impulses through protein channels. How are they not constantly shorting out?" VR Kath's resonant laugh cut through the chatter. "You all miss the point. Their seeming weaknesses are precisely what make humans dangerous. They've evolved to turn disadvantages into weapons." "That's actually pretty insightful," Kai admitted. Administrator Zex oscillated through several concerned frequencies. "Even if if we could arrange a supervised combat demonstration, there are protocols, safety measures, waivers to be signed in triplicate and notarized by a Class 3 AI. "I have already filed the necessary documentation," VR Kath announced smugly, "including Form X-1337B, voluntary participation in potentially fatal but educationally valuable combat exercises." "When did you?" "This morning, before the drone demonstration." "I had a feeling." Kai couldn't help but grin. "You knew I'd surprise them." "I did research." VR Kath's form rippled with what might have been pride. "Your species has a fascinating combat history. Did you know you're the only known civilization to develop thousands of different ways to fight without weapons? Most species just evolved better natural weapons." The medical student was still obsessing over their holopad. "But their musculature is so basic, just protein fibers and chemical energy. They don't even have auxiliary power sources." "We manage," Kai deadpanned. Administrator Zex's crystalline structure went through what appeared to be the alien equivalent of a stress headache. "Fine. But we do this properly. Full medical team on standby. Environmental controls locked to safe parameters. And someone please explain to the physics department that they can't attach sensors to the human during the fight." "Much appreciated," Kai nodded. "Though I do have one condition." Everyone froze. VR Kath's metallic surface rippled with curiosity. "No technology, no gravity controls, no force fields, no neural enhancers, just you and me, testing our natural capabilities against each other." The garden erupted in shocked whispers. Fight a deuterium-based life form without technological assistance? It was madness. VR Kath's form solidified into its most combat-ready configuration. "Agreed. Tomorrow, then? The main arena." "Looking forward to it," Kai smiled. "Though you might want to warn the physics department their fundamental laws of motion are about to have a really bad day." Word of the drone incident spread through the academy faster than a quantum entanglement breach. By afternoon, the medical wing had treated 16 students for injuries sustained while attempting to run up walls like the human. The physics department demanded footage for analysis, convinced that Kai must have violated at least 3 fundamental laws of motion. VR Kath found Kai in the meditation garden, sitting cross-legged near a floating crystal formation. The deuterium-based warrior's approach sent ripples through the garden's quantum-harmonized atmosphere. "Your demonstration was..." Illuminating VR Kath's metallic form shifted into what approximated a respectful bow. "I request the honor of personal combat." 3 nearby students dropped their datapads. A passing instructor nearly crashed into a gravity-suspended planter. "Honored by the challenge," Kai responded, unfolding from his position with fluid grace. "Though I believe several regulations might have something to say about it." As if summoned by bureaucratic magic, Administrator Zex materialized between them, their crystalline form flashing warning colors. "Absolutely not. The insurance implications alone would." "With respect," Administrator VR Kath interrupted, "the human has proven himself worthy of..." "Worthy of what?" A trip to the molecular reassembly chamber. Zex's form sparked with agitation. "Do you have any idea how many forms I'd have to fill out if you accidentally liquefied his carbon-based structure?" Kai raised an eyebrow. "You know, we humans aren't quite that fragile." This sparked an immediate debate among the growing crowd of onlookers. A medical student frantically pulled up human anatomical data on their holopad. "But your endoskeleton is made of calcium deposits," they protested. "And your hydraulic systems are based on iron oxide suspension." "You mean bones and blood," Kai suggested helpfully. "And look at this," another student pointed at the display. "Their neural network runs on electrical impulses through protein channels. How are they not constantly shorting out?" Kath's resonant laugh cut through the chatter. "You all miss the point. Their seeming weaknesses are precisely what make humans dangerous. They've evolved to turn disadvantages into weapons." "That's actually pretty insightful," Kai admitted. Administrator Zex oscillated through several concerned frequencies. "Even if, and I stress, if we could arrange a supervised combat demonstration, there are protocols, safety measures, waivers to be signed in triplicate and notarized by a Class 3 AI. "I have already filed the necessary documentation," Kath announced smugly, "including Form X-1337B, voluntary participation in potentially fatal but educationally valuable combat exercises." "When did you?" "This morning, before the drone demonstration." "I had a feeling." Kai couldn't help but grin. "You knew I'd surprise them." "I did research." Kath's form rippled with what might have been pride. "Your species has a fascinating combat history. Did you know you're the only known civilization to develop thousands of different ways to fight without weapons? Most species just evolved better natural weapons." The medical student was still obsessing over their holopad, but their musculature is so basic. Just protein fibers and chemical energy. They don't even have auxiliary power sources. "We manage," Kai deadpanned. Administrator Zix's crystalline structure went through what appeared to be the alien equivalent of a stress headache. "Fine. Fine. But we do this properly. Full medical team on standby. Environmental controls locked to safe parameters. And someone please explain to the physics department that they can't attach sensors to the human during the fight." "Much appreciated," Kai nodded. "Though I do have one condition." Everyone froze. Kath's metallic surface rippled with curiosity. "No technology, no gravity controls, no force fields, no neural enhancers. Just you and me, testing our natural capabilities against each other." The garden erupted in shocked whispers. Fight a deuterium-based life form without technological assistance? It was madness. Kath's form solidified into its most combat-ready configuration. "Agreed. Tomorrow, then? The main arena." "Looking forward to it," Kai smiled. "Though you might want to warn the physics department their fundamental laws of motion are about to have a really bad day." The Academy's Grand Hall had never seen such chaos. Students from 17 different species attempted to mimic human martial arts stances, resulting in what looked like a mass demonstration of advanced interpretive dance gone wrong. 3 crystalline beings had cracked themselves trying to perform a roundhouse kick. The medical bay reported an unprecedented surge in what they termed gravity-related overconfidence injuries. In the center of this beautiful disaster stood Kai, surrounded by eager students and increasingly baffled instructors. "But how do you execute a proper throw without gravitational manipulators?" demanded Telvor, their serpentine form twisted into what they thought was a ready stance, but looked more like a pretzel with ambitions. "That's the beauty of it," Kai explained, demonstrating a basic hip throw on a volunteer. You use your opponent's energy against them. Their own momentum does the work. "Primitive genius," exclaimed Administrator Zex, who had been observing from a safe distance. "No reliance on technology that could fail. No complex power systems to maintain. Just pure biomechanical efficiency." Morthak, sporting what appeared to be a bruised ego, along with his ceremonial combat arrays, finally spoke up. "The Academy Council has revised its position on human combat techniques." Okai raised an eyebrow, helping a silicon-based student untangle themselves from an overly ambitious attempt at a butterfly guard. "We've been approaching combat from an increasingly technological perspective," Morthak admitted, all 3 eyes fixed on the continuing chaos around them. "Always seeking the next advancement, the next enhancement. We forgot the fundamental principles that make a warrior effective." Kath, who had been cheerfully allowing students to practice throws on his liquid metal form, solidified long enough to add, "Humans never had the option of relying on natural weapons or biological advantages. So you learn to use everything and anything as a weapon, including the very laws of physics." "The council has decided," Administrator Zex announced, their crystalline form glowing with formal authority, "to establish a new combat curriculum. Primitive combat techniques adapting human martial arts for multi-species application. They paused. We'd like you to teach it. The hall fell silent, aside from the muffled thud of another student discovering why you shouldn't attempt a flying kick without proper training. I'd be honored, Kai replied, then grinned. Though we might want to start with the basics, like how to fall properly. Yes, please, groaned several voices from the floor. The most remarkable aspect, mused a theoretical xenobiologist who had been taking furious notes, is how this demonstrates human evolutionary adaptation. Unable to compete with natural weapons, they developed the ability to analyze and counter any fighting style they encountered, which makes them far more dangerous than any naturally armed species. Cath added proudly. Give a human enough time to study an opponent, and they'll find a way to turn that opponent's strengths into weaknesses. Like using my own mass distribution against me, he continued, demonstrating by allowing his form to flow through several different combat configurations, or discovering that human sweat could disrupt my molecular cohesion. Brilliant. We're basically professional improvisers, Kai shrugged. Give us a problem, and we'll find a solution, usually one that nobody else thought of, because it seemed too primitive to consider. Administrator Zex's form flickered with what might have been embarrassment. Perhaps we should revise our definition of primitive in the Academy glossary. Agreed. Thak nodded, watching as Kai demonstrated a simple wrist lock that somehow worked on species that didn't technically have wrists. Though I suggest we wait until after the physics department finishes their nervous breakdown. They're still trying to explain how you manage that wall run without breaking several laws of motion. Speaking of physics, Cath rumbled. Should we tell them about the parkour classes you're planning? The collective groan from the medical team was audible, even through their quantum-shielded observation room. One step at a time, Kai laughed, helping another student up from the floor. Though I have to say, teaching martial arts to beings made of liquid metal and living crystal definitely wasn't covered in my instructor certification. Thak's ceremonial arrays actually glittered with amusement. Perhaps we all have something to learn about adaptation. 3 months after the legendary sparring match, the Zex'thra Combat Academy's promotional materials underwent a subtle but significant change. The holographic banners now proudly displayed a new tagline. Combining advanced technology with primitive wisdom, though the word primitive had a habit of glitching out and being replaced by foundational. Kai's combat philosophy class had become the most popular elective in the Academy's history, despite or perhaps because of its strict no-tech enhancements allowed policy. The medical bay had finally stopped panicking every time they saw students practicing breakfalls, though they still maintained a dedicated parkour incidents ward. The most fascinating outcome Cath observed during a staff meeting is how human martial arts have evolved to accommodate different species' physiologies as liquid metal form demonstrated by flowing through a perfect Aikido technique. Who would have thought that formless beings could benefit from studying joint locks? Speaking of evolution, Administrator Zex chimed in, their crystalline structure vibrating with barely contained amusement. The Galactic Federation has received 16 applications from other primitive species seeking combat instructor positions. Apparently, Earth isn't the only planet that developed interesting solutions to not having natural weapons. Thak, who had taken to practicing Tai Chi in his off hours, nodded sagely. Sometimes the most elegant solution is the simplest one. Though I still say humans are cheating by having opposable thumbs, says the instructor with 4 arms, Kai replied dryly. But yes, that's exactly the point. Every species develops combat techniques based on their limitations, not just their advantages. The real skill is in adapting those techniques to work for everyone. The Academy's training halls now regularly echoed with the sound of beings of all compositions learning to redirect energy, use leverage, and occasionally pick themselves up off the floor, while muttering about gravity's personal vendetta against them. I hear the Arcturus Military Academy is requesting a human combat instructor, Cath mentioned casually. Something about their top graduate being defeated by a human using nothing but a rolled-up training manual and creative interpretation of momentum. Well, Kai grinned, watching a group of energy beings attempting to master the concept of grappling. I might know a few qualified candidates. Though we should probably warn them about the paperwork involved in teaching primitive combat techniques to advanced civilizations. Administrator Zex's form flickered in what had become their version of an eye roll. I've already updated the insurance policies to cover innovative application of basic physics and gravity-related enlightenment. As Kai headed to his next class, he passed the Academy's newly updated mission statement, Excellence in Combat Through Universal Principles. Below it, someone had scrawled in permanent marker, warning, Physics Department still recovering.